Welcome. We're back for our virtual tasting, live tasting, totally socially isolated from one another. I think collectively there's at least 200 miles between us, depending on which road you take. And we're tasting two very distinctive wines here from the same vineyard, from Tango Oaks. Hence, Tango versus Tango. The 2010 Riesling and the 2012 Riesling, both from Red Newt, of course. Very different vintages, very different weather, different vine age. It's a fairly young vineyard. So that first, the 2010 was actually the very first crop from that vineyard. Well, we got like a 5-gallon bucket the year before, but the very first crop, which was pretty small. And hence we approached them very differently in the cellar as well to try to capture and optimize what we had coming from the vineyard. So I think we should taste. Excellent.
Okay.
I guess we'll start with the 2010, eh?
Yeah, I did.
Yeah. I know you've been
Guilty as charged.
You know, I should stop. I have to introduce people. I always forget this part. Meg's Goodwin here, I think, over here. But Meg's Goodwin, assistant winemaker. Heather O'Grady Evans, our media manager and front of house manager, who is running these tastings and lots of stuff. And Kelby Russell, our winemaker. And I'm Dave Whiting, founding winemaker and co-owner here at Red Newt Cellars. So both of these wines, wow, let's go ahead and taste. Yeah. 2010. What a delightful nose. Kind of, what is that? Sort of honeysuckle and maybe jasmine.
Has some of that like classic white peach for Tango Oaks.
Mm-hmm.
Really beautiful and rich mouthfeel too.
Yeah, this type of finish that the wine has makes me, and I have been, keep going back for another sip of the wine. I find it really intriguing and it keeps drawing me in, and there's some nice texture and some nice acid, and really like this style.
I think looking at the acid number on the label, which not that we want anyone to pay attention to the numbers instead of what they're tasting, but I think of Tango Oaks as having very gentle, rounded acid as a site. It's always the most elegant expression of Riesling. And even in this sort of, we would call it like German Cabernet expression, a little bit lower alcohol, higher sugar, higher acid. It's a balanced wine, but the acid doesn't taste nearly as high as the number would suggest it would in another vineyard.
Yeah, I did look back at the harvest data on this, and we harvested this at not real high sugars, around a little over 20, acids, well over 9 grams per liter, and and it was that first crop, and I think we're seeing some of that real precocious expression of that sometimes young vineyards have in very early years, and knowing what we've learned about working with young fruit Riesling from the young vineyards that we've dealt with is even though this is really delicious and expressive in this style, our prediction was, and we'll actually never know whether this is true because we did it this way, not another way, but our prediction was that if we made it in a style that was lean and dry, it just wouldn't have the stuffing and body to pull it off. So instead we looked at its assets and it's really the beauty that we saw within the grapes and tried to figure out how to express it the best we could.
Mm-hmm. I mean, that intuitively makes sense for how vineyards come along as well. I mean, those first couple of years, I've started jokingly calling the Shirley Temple years because they're so precocious. I mean, the fruit is just effusive. The wines can be beautiful, but they don't necessarily have the stuffing and the structure to stand up to the sort of rigors of being an intense dry Riesling yet, even if they have great flavors.
One of the things that I've always loved about Tango Oaks is that regardless of the style that we've created for a particular vintage based on the fruit coming from the vineyard, it's very versatile with food. I think sometimes even more so than some of our other Rieslings because it creates such a beautifully understated and full flavored Riesling. I find myself wanting this with cheese, but then wanting it with other things. And I can have it on just hanging out on the front porch, or I can put it with a really elegant meal. And any way I enjoy it, it's always going to stand up to what it's sitting there with.
Yeah, I find myself just wanting to have more.
What I'm saying.
I'm pretty sure that's what Meg's been saying for the last few minutes.
Well, let's go on to this 2012. In 2010, actually 2010 and 2012 had some similarities in terms of weather, but were really different too. I'll start with 2012. 2012 was a really ripe year, very early bud break, long growing season. A bud break that was kind of put us in the touch and go situation, worrying about frost, but we came through okay, no frost, and ended up in a really long season, really ripe fruit, pretty dry, sort of a classic sort of 2012, 07, 05 sort of ripening season. 2010 was also quite warm, a really warm summer, but it rained a lot. So whereas in some of these drier years like 2012, we had a lot of ripeness, but also sort of even some inhibition in the vineyards because of low moisture and maybe even some drought stress. In 2010, there was no shortage of water. So the canopies were huge and the vegetative growth was huge. And there's lots of photosynthesis and lots of sugar. So it was really kind of a kooky year. At the time, I don't know if we've had one like that since, but at the time I'd never seen anything like it.
I haven't had anything quite like that. I remember over at Fox Run, because that's where I was during the 2010 growing season and vintage, that we joked that every Thursday it seemed like it just bucketed rain that summer. And it just, in other days as well, but like clockwork, Thursday you would just get an inch of rain. It was wild.
So what did it do? Well, I see that kind of classic white peach sort of stone fruit pit kind of thing coming through that we see in Tango. Not so much the vibrant, effusive honeysuckle and jasmine and those kinds of fruits here. Much drier too. This is really lean. More of the style that Tango has gone to in subsequent vintages.
This shows a lot of kind of lime zest characters to me, which I find very, very appealing. And then I'm seeing a decent amount of like secondary characteristics starting to show up in this wine, and I like that development's progressing along nicely.
What are the secondary characteristics, Megs?
Oh, I guess I'm seeing a little bit more of baked fruits, a little bit more of that kind of petrol character that I typically would come to expect with something like this. And also in that vintage, 2012 across the board for me did actually show for Rieslings a lot more petrol than I've seen in other vintages, which is really interesting kind of trend to see.
Yeah, it kind of maps on to what Dave was just talking about, comparing the 10 and 12 vintage. 12 was equally as warm as 10, or roughly speaking, but was much drier, much sunnier. And, insofar as we have an understanding of such things, the precursor chemical for petrol has a lot to do with sunlight exposure and heat during the growing season. And 12 had that in spades. It was, I look back at harvest dates, and I don't know if you looked at them for this, Dave, but whenever a question comes up about a 2012 Riesling, I look at harvest dates and I'm just baffled at how earlier we were picking. We were bringing in fruit for dry Riesling, which normally would be the end of October. We were picking, September 20th that year. And it was ripe. We weren't pressured into it. It was ready to go.
Yeah.
We've had a really interesting question that came up, so I'm going to read it for you guys. Patty Dominic has actually chimed in, and she said, every time I have a wine that has a full mouthfeel, I think of sweeter wines, not drier wines.
Yeah, there's this concept that the Germans and Austrians in particular are keen on, called dry extract, which is a measurable thing that basically says, how much stuff is in the wine if you get rid of all the liquid. Technical term, stuff. But they've in recent years the concept of what's called sugar-free dry extract has become more interesting to winemakers, which is to say, if you take all the liquid out and the sugar out, how much stuff is left? Again, technical term. But there are dry wines, and there are ways of particular vineyards and ways of working with particular wines that even without the sugar, you'll still have a lot of this extract that really gives you an impression of body and weight in the mouth. And I think that difference between dry extract and sugar-free dry extract kind of speaks to that question, because sugar does add weight, just on its own, even without the other things considered. So it's interesting to be able to separate the two out.
So, Dave, I have a question. So from having gone from a younger vineyard that was very precocious, when do you guys make the decision to start transitioning to a dry style with that fruit?
Ooh, well, that is a very technical question. It has a technical answer similar to the stuff that Kelby was talking about. It's really, that falls into that set of decisions that are largely based on intuition and experience. I'm trying to remember what we did now in of course, 2011 was such a kooky year, it probably doesn't even matter. But yeah, I would expect starting in this with 2012, 2010, 2012 is like the fifth leaf of that vineyard. Based on other vineyards, by that time, things are starting to kick in. And we had the 2010 and 2011 to look at. So I guess at the outset in 2012, we were thinking that it probably was going to respond well in this style more so than a couple of years before. But then you have to layer in the direct sort of observation of what's in the tank during harvest. Even if you start out thinking that that's going to be the target, if you just go full steam ahead with a winemaking target and don't pay attention to what the fruit or the juice is telling you, you're apt not to hit the right target at the end. So you always are making these sort of reassessments and sort of further judgments along the way about where you should try to nudge things one way or the other. Yeah, well, these would be interesting. There's, and we one of the things that we've been tasting Rieslings. This 2010 that's been in the bottle for 8 years. Well, what year is it? 29 years. This is the vintage from 10 years ago. We haven't been talking much, or the comments haven't been coming up much about, wow, that's like really old tasting.
Yeah.
So youthful and vibrant. It's really quite remarkable.
Yeah, I saw we had a really nice compliment on Instagram that we got tagged in just last night from Doug Frost, who's a master of wine and master sommelier out in Kansas City. And he had opened up a bottle of the 13 Lahoma last night. So not to switch vineyards on everyone here, but and was just astonished at how youthful it was. And was just raving about it. And a hat tip to Brian Butterfield, who follows him and tagged us in it, because otherwise we totally would have missed it, or I would have. But I think I think winemaking at Red Newt and Riesling at Red Newt is often very. These wines take years and years to open up. You can enjoy them when they're young, but they just they age so elegantly and so slowly that you can really appreciate them over multiple years.
Yeah, I remember when we first started in this industry, the very first thing that we were always taught was make sure you sell the Rieslings off first, because they're not going to age. And if we're going to get our name out there, that's the only way we're going to do it is with Riesling. So just tell them to buy it, and drink it. Because they were already drinking the you-know-whats out of Labruskins and hybrids, and that was just what it was. But they told us to do the same thing with Riesling. And the concept of actually aging Riesling was unheard of. If you had a 3-year-old Riesling on your tasting room list back in 1999, 2000, 2001, people wanted to know what you did wrong with it. Because there's no way in God's creation that you could still have a Riesling on your tasting sheet back then and have it be a good wine. And I think the complete opposite is we have learned is actually now kind of true.
Yeah, it's nice to have the wines a little bit older. It's a commitment and a financial commitment, and maybe some would call it a financial burden to have several years worth of vintages in the warehouse, waiting to be released. We're pretty fortunate. I mean, where we're sitting right now with this 2010 and 2012, which we still have, I don't know how much we have, but we have a reasonable amount of both of them, is all through the first 10 or 15 years that Red Newt was around, we had the restaurant with a very broad wine list. So we were socking away a lot of wine to be on that list and be drunk 5, 10, 15 years later. So we're not selling as much wine in the restaurant, especially today, because it's closed until we have pandemic relief. And so we get to drink all these beautifully aged wines that have been kind of tucked away for another day, and today's the day. And a lot of these, actually all these that we're tasting in these live tasting series are now on the website too. So in addition to me and Megs and Kelby and Heather running down and rating the cellar, you can too.
I think that was actually, as I was getting into really starting to love and enjoy and understand wine, not just from a winemaking side, but just appreciating what wines are, is I discovered that I had made the tragic flaw of buying one bottle of wines that I really liked. And then you open your one bottle and that is the end all be all of it. So I've definitely made a point for myself in particular with wines that I really enjoyed to buy at least 3 bottles, kind of open up over time. And we are lucky that we have access to these, but I actually had the 2010 Tango in my wine collection, we'll call it, and was really pleased to know that I've got another bottle of this waiting for me in another couple years to see where it goes.
Oh, I guess usually we wrap up talking about food, don't we?
I was hoping to get inspiration from these wines, and I did, which is good. I do want something just a little bit, I don't know, soothing, comforting for me today. So I'm definitely going to make like a ginger chicken noodle soup, which is actually one of my favorites. But then after having the 2010 Tango, I think I might challenge myself and do like a lemon poppy cake to go with something like that as well.
We were thinking of, we've been doing a lot of cooking, and we were thinking of supporting one of the restaurants here in Geneva that does takeout in this uncertain time. So I don't know if that's going to be Kindred Fare or FLX Freiburg, but either of them have, especially Freiburg would have, fried chicken would be perfect with the zinginess of either of these Rieslings.
Yeah, I'm thinking chicken. We ventured to the grocery store today and picked up some chicken. And we got, what else did we get? Things are, we have lots of food. I mean, we're so fortunate, but we do run out of certain things, like things that are fresh and green. And so I think chicken, maybe something with some lemon and cilantro, and maybe some nice, we could run out of our favorite sort of style of basmati rice, maybe something nice and delicate along those lines.
Well, I realize I have asparagus in the refrigerator. So I have some asparagus. I have a little bit of kale. So I'll probably take some of those and take the very last of the shrimp that I have in the freezer and cook that off, because tomorrow is an important day because my cousin just released the first of her lambs from her farm. So we've got lamb on the menu for tomorrow.
Well, super. You better get cooking. And to all of you folks out there, thanks for joining us. And we'll make a little toast to health, happiness, and more Riesling, I suppose. Ding.
Cheers.
Cheers. Good night.